We are at part number 35, and we are in Revelation chapter 9. We weren't together last time, but Revelation chapter 9, what we're going to do is we're not going to spend a long period of time on this second woe or the sixth of the trumpets. We're going to take just a little bit of time because here's one of the things that can happen when you study something like this verse by verse, and you're going through and you're looking at this, and it goes week by week. What can happen is in the very beginning, we kind of have an overview look at things. We kind of tried to show you where things were at, but if you spend a whole lot of time going verse by verse, and it's a week at a time and a week at a time in between, what can happen is you can lose a perspective of really what's going on. I'm thinking it might be next Sunday that Pastor is going to do this thing, a certain timeline that he's going to do and have things laid out up here, because you got to be able to see that stuff. You got to be able to know. That's why we utilize a timeline and things like that. So we are in chapter, let's put it up here right quick. If we're in chapter 9 tonight, means we've covered the rest of them up there, and we're in verses, I think it's be about 13 through 21. And we're going to cover that. We should be able to cover it pretty quickly. But what I want you to do with me here for just a few minutes, we want to go back and just grab a few facts and a few things to see what you remember and try to help you remember going back at the beginning of the book. If we were to put up here chapter 1, can anybody remember anything from chapter 1? Any event, anything that took place? You could give the easy answer. What do you think was in chapter 1? Maybe the introduction. Okay, so see, I'm helping a little bit here. All right, so you got the intro right there. The intro was in chapter 1, but there was something specific that we learned in chapter 1, something that we saw that was a good chunk of the end of the chapter. There's a few other facts in chapter 1. Who wrote the book? Who? John. So you had John as he was the author there. Where was John at? Does anybody remember that? It was the Isle of. Almost all of you'll know once you hear it. What's that? Not Sicily. No. Huh? Patmos. You said it, didn't you? Very good. He received it there on the Isle of Patmos. Okay? This is kind of like doing trivia and just giving you the answers. All right? So, chapter 1, you have the intro, you have the author, John, where he was at, the Isle of Patmos, but there was something that John saw. The stars are mentioned there, but there's something specific that is like a big thing that John saw in chapter 1. What's that? Not the beast, no. Think of the name of the book. The book is called Revelation. It is the revelation of Jesus Christ. All right? So what did John see? He saw Jesus, all right? And what was important, though, and let's do this. We're not going to read everything as we come to it, but let me just show you a couple of things as we go. Because you get in chapter 1, and you get that description. It's not just that he saw Jesus in his glorified state. All right, look at a few of those verses there. Let me back up just a hair here. I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle, right across through here. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire. And his feet unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice is the sound of many waters. He had in his right hand 7 stars. There you go, Madison. And out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And he laid his right hand upon me, saying, Fear not, I am the first and the last. I am he that liveth and was dead, and behold, am alive forevermore. So you've got this vision, and he gets to see Christ in his glorified state. And really, the description is important, but his reaction is very important. He fell down at his feet as dead. And you got to remember this. This is John. John had done miracles himself. John had walked with Christ. He had seen the miracle. He watched the people get fed. He watched him walk on water. He watched Lazarus be risen from the dead. John had already seen all of that and had walked with Christ in his earthly ministry as a man. But now he's going to see him here in this state. And even though he had all that, he falls down at his feet as dead. So that's one of those things that you want to pick up on and recognize as you're looking through this. All right? So real quickly, let's go to chapter 2. We're not going to take a whole lot of time with it, but let's just go ahead and chapter 2 and 3. Please tell me you know what's in chapter 2 and 3. Somebody tell me they know what's in chapter 2 and 3. And it did not have to be Andrew. All right? The what? Yes, it was the 7 churches. Now, most of y'all, Madison, you knew that, didn't you? You did. Okay, Nick, you knew that, right? You had that, right? Nod your head up and down, okay? Make me feel better. All right, good. So you got the 7 churches. I will not ask you to list them off, but we'll see how many of the 7 we can get. All right, there were 7 churches that were mentioned. Name one. One. Ephesus, that a girl. All right, so we got Ephesus. All right. We'll put them in order later. All right, Ephesus, who can remember another one? Y'all are missing Madison's handwriting from Sunday morning, aren't you? Because hers is so much better. Ephesus, and what else? Huh? Philadelphia, there you go. Got Philly. We'll put a little, we'll just... period. All right, give me one more. We're 2 for 5. We're 2 out of 7. Who's got another one? It's an open book test, just so you know. you do have that. Yes. Smyrna. There you go. All right. Smyrna. 3. Give me another one. Smyrna. We know it's in chapter 2 and 3 of Revelation. It means you could probably look there. Yes. Pergamos. Look at it. Nice. There you go. P-E-R-G-A-M-O-S. Pergamos. Give me 3 more. Who? Sardis. What else? Give me the first letter. T. Is it Thyatira? Yeah, that's it. T-H-Y, period. There we go. Thyatira, I can spell it. And what is actually the 7th church? The church of, starts with an L, Laodicea. There we go. All right, so L-A-O, we'll just do it right there. All right, so there were the 7 churches there. And Laodicea was number 7. So I'm not going to try to go in order here, but Ephesus was number 1, so we did pretty good. We started and finished pretty good right there. Philadelphia, I know, is the 6th one. All right, and let's see here. I jotted them down. I cheated. Pergamos was number 3. And then number 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4. Thyatira down here, number 4. And number 5 was Sardis. And that would make number 6. Let's see, 1, 2. 2, Smyrna, right? Is that right? Yep, that's it. All right, so there's your 7 churches. There was an outline Remember, there were certain things that he said to every church. Each church has a command. Each church was warned about different things, but a similar outline was used. We alliterated it with the letter R. All right? So if we were to go, and I come over here to Revelation chapter 2, unto the angel of the church of Ephesus write, these things saith he that holdeth the 7 stars in his right hand, who walketh in the midst of the 7 candlesticks. Do you remember us saying that description in chapter 1 was mentioned in each one of the churches? A different portion was there. All right. So each one starts off, we started each one of these off, the outline, the revelator. All right. So we've got this description of him there. But we also kind of added something, maybe even a little bit before that, we just made note of. We'll put that as number 2. Number 1, it says, unto the angel. Each one of these messages is to the church, but it's written unto the angel. If we go to that one, if we were to come down to the next one here, verse 8, and unto the angel of the church in Smyrna. It's going to say that to every church. So we had what did I put down there? The recipient. And we just put that so we would remember it. R-E-C-I-P-I-T-N-T. Close. The recipient. So you had the revelator. All right, that description there. And then those 4 words in verse 2, I know thy works. I know thy works. He said that to every one of them. We talked about the importance of works. They have to endure to the end. They have to do certain things to make it through this time, because when you go back and look and you see what they're told and what they're instructed to do, and then you see all that they're going to have to go through, and you come back and look at this, it gives you a little bit more enlightenment there. When he says, I know thy works, he's getting ready to say something about something they need to improve on, or something they need to be warned about. So he called it a reproof. A reproof. Everybody needs a reproof here and there, kicking the pants. All right? I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience, and how thou canst not bear them which are evil. And thou hast tried them which say they are apostles and are not, hast found them liars, and hast borne and hast patience. Keep on going. And for my name's sake has labored and has not fainted. Nevertheless, I have somewhat against thee, because thou hast left thy first love. Actually, I left out one. I was like, I thought there was something missing there, because before of what we just read, the reproof comes. There's something that comes before. When he says, I know thy works, he talks about the good things they did before he corrects them. So he gives them starts with an R. Just guess. Anybody got a guess? He's looking back over what they've done. No. It's a review. All right? Recipient, the revelator, the review, then the reproof. I know thy works, and then there is a correction that goes on in there. And then as you continue reading down, he talks about it, verse 6, but this thou hast, that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh. To each one of them, he talks about to him that overcometh. If they overcome, what's going to happen? What do they get? It starts with an R. If they heed to that reproof and they overcome and they do right, they will receive a reward. There we go. All right. All right. And then we'll read on down just a little bit more. Oh, I keep missing one because I redid this in here. I keep forgetting to put one in here. All right. Before they get their reward, after they receive the reproof, he tells them what they need to do to fix it. So he gives them a remedy, all right? See, I just keep messing up on purpose just so it'll help y'all to pay attention, right? Y'all know that, right? Y'all got that down, right? No problem. All right, I'm glad. See, preacher don't make many mistakes, so it's more fun with me because I just make mistakes all the time. So it makes you have to pay attention and make sure I'm saying the right thing, all right? And the last thing, let's keep on reading. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. So we kind of go back and use that little phrase, he that hath an ear. There is finally a reminder with that reward. He is telling them that. So to each one of those churches, you have this little outline there, and he applies it to each one. Now the message to each one is different. Gives them warnings, gives them instructions, tells them all these different things. So that's chapter 2 and chapter 3. What happened in chapter 4? What did they see in chapter 4? Anybody remember? Where does he go? Where does he transport him? I saw it mouthed. What you got? He goes to heaven. He went to which one? Third. There you go. Very good. Just being specific. So he goes up to the third heaven and sees all the go. First off, he sees that vision. He sees the glorified Christ. Now he's going to go up and see God on his throne. He's going to see Christ at his right hand there. And you've got this vision. Remember, we talked about all the colors and all the lights and all the sounds and the voices, and all of those things were there. And who else did we meet? What did he see up there? Number-wise, there were some groups that were there. There were the four what? Oh, you got the 24 if you look right up there. All right. Here, we'll start with the 24 because they're right up there. Round about the throne were 420 seats, and upon the seats I saw the 420 elders. So we'll just put the 24 elders up there. All right, you got the 24 elders, and we'll scroll down just a little bit, and it says there were four what in verse 6? 4 beasts, all right? Sitting those cherubs there for the 4 beasts. All right, so he sees all that. All right, we go over quickly to chapter 5. We're in the same place, here. And verse 5, and I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within. Well, it says it was a book, but what form do you think did we talk about that it was probably in if it was sealed? A what? Well, it's like this is a book, this is an iPad. If you go back in history, what would it have looked like before they had bound books? A what? A scroll. All right, very good. Because with those scrolls, they could seal it right there and then open it up. So most likely, we don't know that 100% sure, but most likely that was the way that it was. So you have, and we'll just call it the sealed book there. There's a sealed book, and then there is a search. What were they searching for in chapter 5? Anybody remember? There was a search that went on. Who is worthy to open the book, verse 2, and loose the seals thereof? The search was for somebody worthy to open the book and loose the seals thereof. That would be the answer right there. Yeah, I saw it. He was proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy? And we know when that search goes on, we talked about it, there was no man in heaven, earth, under the earth that was able to open the book, neither to look thereon. So there had to be this search that went on to find somebody worthy to open up this book. And it was an emotional thing there. It was a reality because he says he wept much because they couldn't find anybody. And then there's that encouragement of him saying, weep not. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the seals thereof. And we know the search was over because who is going to open it? It is going to be the Savior. is going to open the book there because he was worthy. So in chapter 5, you got that. We get to chapter 6. What do we got going on in chapter 6? Got the seals. Chapter 6. The seals are open. And the first 4 are represented by what? Horses. Very good. Colored horses. The first one was white, the imitation. The second one was red. All right, verse 4 right there, 3 and 4. Then we get to verse 5. You got here the third beast, and we have the black horse representing the famine and all that's going to go on there in verses 5 and 6. And then you have the pale horse. And we talked about that word pale. It was probably what tint did it have to it? Greenish. If somebody is sick and they look pale, they can have that kind of, they look green around the gills. We talked about those sayings that come about from the Bible there. So we get the seals opening up there. And then we get over to chapter 7. Chapter 7 was one of the things we said about chapter 7 that was important. I'll just give it to you. We called it parenthetical. It was just kind of inserted there in between. All right? So, but in chapter 7, who are we introduced to in chapter 7? What group is represented there? Does that help? You got the who? Now be a little more specific. Who's going to be there? You're right. You're on the right path. The 144,000. All right, so from the 12 tribes. All right, so you got the 4,400,000 that are sealed, not the witnesses, but we'll call them the sealed. They are sealed. How are they sealed in their foreheads? What does it say? Jehovah, the name of the Father there. All right, so now we're getting close. I want to make sure we don't run out of time here, so I want you to go with me real quick. Let's go to chapter 9, and I want you to go to verse 12. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God. Now, you guys remember us looking at an altar before? There's a few places where we've studied where we've looked at an altar. Anybody remember where that was, or anything come to your mind about that? About the altar? Think for just a second. What do you think, Zach? There you go. We've got those people that are under the altar, and they had been martyred. And how were they martyred? Most likely they were, good job, beheaded. Very good. So they were martyred, and they cried out to Christ, and they said, in a nutshell, how long? How long before you go down and you clean house and that things are taken care of there? All right? So, good job. So we're going to, let me get right back. I had scrolled way back in my notes here, so I want to come right back and give you those passages here. And I didn't print them off. I tried to do it on my phone. I realized, wow, this is really, really small. And so I can almost see it. And so let's go back to Revelation chapter 6 and verse 9. Revelation 6 and verse 9. He had opened the 5th seal, and I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. All right, so then if we were to go over to Revelation chapter 8, not too many weeks ago, we saw when they opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about the space of a half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. So, just think about this for a minute. Now, I can't say I know this for sure, But when we see the altar mentioned, and this altar is right there in the presence of God. You know, a lot of times when people think of an altar and they think of the sacrifices and the things that went on there, you have to remember this, that right there before the throne of God, there's an altar. God designed it that way. God desired it to be that way. So an altar's not a bad thing. An altar is something, I mean, you think about what do they do with an altar? Well, the first thing that comes to mind, well, there has to be a sacrifice. But within that altar, you know what else they did specifically with that altar? That altar had to do with worship. When you take sacrifice and worship, when you think about the blood that is shed for the payment of sin, and when you have an altar, what's one of the other things that's always going to usually go with an altar? If you got an altar and it's functional, what's it going to have? It's going to have a sacrifice, but more practical to it. What else is it going to have? If there's an altar, fire. There you go. So that means you're going to have fire to offer it, and if there's a sacrifice, there's going to be blood. Now remember this, and this becomes more alive as you study the book of Revelation. When it comes to sin, sin either has to be paid for by blood. Obviously, why Christ came and shed his blood so that all sin could be dealt with. But on the other side of that, when it comes to fire, what do we see throughout the book of Revelation when it comes, what's Christ coming back with? He's coming back in fire. Fire also, if sin's not paid for, then it has to be judged. And there's a payment that goes along with that. So this altar, you've got this period, you've got the people under the altar saying, how long? Now you've got the altar there representing the prayers of the saints, that silence. We talked about that. There could have been that silence that you heard nothing else but God hearing the prayers of those saints and him accepting that and receiving that. We talked about the importance of prayer that goes along with that. And then we come over here to chapter 9, and it says, I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar. Now watch those last four words, which is before God. Up there in that third heaven, there's an altar in front of him. There's an altar that is there in his presence. And what we've seen about that altar and what we've learned from the Old Testament, what we see right here, it has to do with the prayers of the saints. It has to do with fire, has to do with sacrifice, has to do with worship. And those are all things that God himself is worthy of and that he has put and positioned there. So it's important to be able to get a hold of that. Verse 14, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound and the great river Euphrates. I spent some time studying about the river Euphrates, and we're not going to go into great detail with it, but I am going to show you so that you have a little bit of an idea of a map here. You've got Turkey, you've got Iraq, you can look over to the left there, you can see Jerusalem and that specific area of the Dead Sea and all that stuff there. But where's the first time? Does anybody know the first time that the river Euphrates is mentioned in the Bible? Anybody got an idea? Where it's mentioned, where it's talked about? Goes way back. Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, when he's establishing the borders of Eden. Most likely the Euphrates River was the eastern border for the nation of Eden, not the Garden of Eden. I looked at a whole bunch of maps and read a whole lot of things on talking about where they believe the Garden of Eden was. You go down there, you can see Kuwait down there. That's the Persian Gulf. People have said that probably back then that some of that where it's water wasn't always water there. It could have been the Garden of Eden right there in that little area there. Some put it up to the north. And, the Euphrates River is that river that's very easily recognized. How many rivers are mentioned in Genesis chapter 2? Anybody remember? 4. I see hands going up back there. Very good. It was 4 different rivers that established that. But you go through your Bible and you see the different places it talks about it. We're not going to take the time, but there's one passage that specifically that I wanted you to see here. We're going to go back to, let me get the Bible back up here, back up to the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51. You got these 4 angels coming out of the river Euphrates. Good night. I can't even say it anymore now. 51 and verses go all the way down towards the end of the book here. Look here starting in verse 62. Then shalt thou say, O Lord, thou hast spoken against this place to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but that it shall be desolate forever. And it shall be when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it, and cast it in the midst of Euphrates. And thou shalt say, thus shall what? Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her, and they shall be weary. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. So that prophecy of the stone was going to be placed on it, and it's cast down there. And see, this is where it gets a little interesting. You think about it. If you go back over here to Revelation chapter 9, so what's in the river Euphrates here? It says that there are 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates, and then they're loosed. Remember, you had others coming up with those locust beasts were coming out on the first woe, and we studied that, that hell on earth of how it was going to be. Well, here you've got this river Euphrates, and if we go back to the photos here and take a look at this, can you see you've got Baghdad in that area right there? You've also got right there near Euphrates, it's not labeled on this map, but that's where you go back to Genesis chapter 11, and you have the Tower of Babel, and you have Babylon, and Nimrod, and the building of that, and that rebellion that went on back in Genesis. And what was all the way back there is everything's going to come to a head coming back to that same place right there. And it's going to be right in that area where Babylon, and we're going to study some things about Babylon after it's destroyed. If you noticed back when we were looking, and I won't go back to Jeremiah, but it talked about it being a desolate place. During the kingdom, we're going to study and see how that area of Babylon, once it's destroyed, is going to become a prison for demonic beasts and those fallen angels, and all of what you see is talked about there. And there's going to be this thing when they come up to see Christ. Remember we talked about that shaft that's going to go down into hell? They're going to be able to see down in there. They're also going to be able to see in Babylon of that great city that was destroyed. And they're going to see, it's almost going to be like walking by just a really creepy zoo, where you're going to have this incarceration of all these beasts and all these demonic creatures that are going to be there and kept there during the kingdom period. But we'll get into more detail about that. Now watch these angels. It says in verse 15, and the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year. Now look at the next phrase, for to slay the third part of men. You know what's interesting? I was sharing this with Andrew earlier. I read a couple of commentaries that were pretty old. I mean, probably 40, 50 years old, and so the men that were writing them were older. And they were talking about on the earth, when they wrote that commentary, the population of the earth was about 2 billion. Well, what's the population of the earth now, approximately? Approximately 7.7 billion. 7.7. It just keeps getting higher. And the more people we have, the faster it's going to multiply. What happens if Christ doesn't come back for 100 years? Man, we could have who knows how many billion people if there's no catastrophic event. I mean, Riley could probably figure it out and do the math and look at the rate of increase based on who's there and how many babies and whatever and come up with something there. But it'd probably be past 10 billion, maybe past 15 billion. That's a lot of people. Look at that phrase. These 4 angels are going to be loosed. How long is that? An hour, a day, a month, and a year? Jewish calendar, a month is 30 days. So we're talking about a year, 360, plus another month, plus a week and an hour. How long in the first woe from a couple of weeks ago, how long were those locust beasts going to torment man? 5 months, very close. 5 months. So you got 5 months, you got a little more than a year and a month. You're right there about a year and a half of stuff going on. Now watch what's going to happen. Depending on how many people are there, this is who's going to do it. You got 4 angels who are going to loose an army, and the number of the army, verse 16, of the horsemen were 200,000. And I heard the number of them. 200,000, that's 200 million. 200 million are going to go out and slay a third of the population. Now let's say Christ returns and the rapture takes place. I don't think it's going to hurt the population a whole lot when the rapture takes place. I mean, the saved are going to leave, but we are the minority. I can't guesstimate how many people I believe to be saved on the earth right now if Jesus came back today, but if it's 10 years before he comes, if it's 100 years, you got to think this way so you can really put it in perspective. A lot of the people that wrote commentaries years back were just thinking about their time period. Most of those guys that were writing back then, if you'd have asked them, probably none of them would have believed that we'd be alive and on the earth today. You know why? Because they'd have believed that Christ would have already returned. But he didn't. Paul believed he was going to come in his lifetime. That's been 2,000 years. Man, a lot of time could still pass by, but regardless of how many people on the earth, 200 million are going to wipe out a third of the population. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horsemen were as the heads of lions. Now remember, as, it doesn't mean it was exactly that way, but it was close to it. And out of their mouth issued fire and smoke and brimstone. This is not the Long Ranger's horse, guys. Look up here. These are not normal horses, just like they were not normal locusts. These are supernatural creatures that have been brought out that have been just diminished over all the years of their fallen nature. And this is what they've become, and they're finally unleashed. And they're going to go out and bring forth this judgment. This is what they're going to look like. And by these 3 was the third part of men killed by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. So you're going to have a fire-breathing horse. And there's going to be smoke and fire and brimstone that comes out. For their power is in their mouth, but watch this, and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of their works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which can neither see, hear, nor walk. After they've gone through this, think about this, they're going to see a third of the population killed by these supernatural beasts, and they're still going to choose to worship idols. Why? Do you think that would get somebody's attention? If you saw one of these critters that we've talked about in chapter 9, these woes, you would think that that would get somebody's attention, but it's not going to. You have to understand, God gave everybody a free will. And as people deny truth, there's something that happens to them. What is the condition of a person who denies truth over and over and over again? What happens to them? What's the Bible call it? Hardens their heart. The Bible talks about people being stiff-necked and hard-hearted, but they just get to a place where they have such pride and such hatred that regardless of what happens, they won't change. They won't turn. You know, people look at what goes on in our country and other places, it's like, man, it's bad, it's terrible. Hey, it doesn't matter how bad it gets. Some people are not going to turn to God. The only reason a person turns to the Lord is because they see the truth and they accept it and they believe it and they yield themselves to it there. Verse 21, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Third of the population, whether it's 2 billion, whether it's 5 billion, are going to be wiped out by these creatures. After they went through the locust plague that brought hell on earth to where they couldn't die, now they're going to die. And there's going to be such fear. These things are going to come through, and I can't imagine the size of them and the strength of them. And it's one thing to have a horse running at you. If you've ever been kicked by a horse or been around a horse, if you're on the ground, it's hard to control a horse. If you don't have reins and ropes and things like that, if you don't have a saddle and all that stuff that goes along with it, it's hard to control a wild horse because they're stronger and they're bigger and they weigh more. And these are going to breathe fire. And see, if you watch too much TV, too many movies, play too many video games, this just becomes part of that, and it's not true. But young people, we study this because if you're saved, you're not going to be here when this takes place. But you have to understand how God views sin. That's why there's an altar in front of him. We like to talk about, man, the blood that was shed that forgives us of our sins. Amen. But the fire also represents the judgment and how much God hates sin and how it has to be dealt with. And this is where it begins to come to the end of it there. So you understand the severity of it. I believe that's why he reveals these things to us. All right, we are done. We went a little long, but we started a little late. So let's go ahead and pray. Father, we are thankful, Lord,